and one morning in 1994, not to completely date myself, I came downstairs and my dad was sitting at the kitchen table and he's like, oh, I'm so glad that you're awake. I've got something to show you. And he gave to me a certificate in 1994 PowerPoint technology, thank you very much, which I still have. And it said, it was a certificate. And I said, well, thanks, but what's this for? And he said, oh, I had the most vivid dreams last night and you were loud. And you were in this tennis tournament, this big tennis tournament, and you won the whole thing. And so I wanted to give you this certificate in honor of that. Oh, that's great, Dad, thanks, funny, haha. And then he said, and then he created another certificate. This one was pretty slick. I'm pretty sure it drained all the paint on our bubble cartridge. And it just had 3 simple words on it. And it said, be focused, watch the ball, and have fun. And I still have that PowerPoint to this day. And so today's HR agenda has gotten increasingly more complicated than ever before. It's accelerated at a very, very fast rate, and it feels like you don't just have one tennis ball coming at you, but you have like a barrage of tennis balls coming at you from us, because that's ball machine. Okay, I feel good that it's not just me. And so as leaders, this is our leadership challenge. We have an even larger responsibility to make sure that we are guarding our teams and translating our company's priorities and helping our teams to focus. Our teams have precious little time and precious finite amounts of energy, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are guarding that. In short, it is our job to make sure that we are helping them focus, watch the ball, and have some fun. Life as an HR professional used to be simpler, at least for me. I remember cycles, I remember really, really busy cycles, like comp cycles and end of year giving campaigns and strategy cycles, but then it felt like there was always a moment where there was thought time, think time. And I don't know about you, but it just hasn't felt like that in a really long time. And I got to thinking, why is that? And so recently our CHRO challenged us to put down books on leadership and pick up books on digitization. So I picked up a book called The Future is Faster Than You Think, which I highly encourage you to read. And it was all about the why, going deep on the why, about how this is accelerating so fast for us. And it talked about the acceleration of these technologies, silos, right? And then the convergence of those technologies working together in order to create a speed that we have never before experienced. It is even so bold as to say that because of that convergence and acceleration, it's likely that my children will own flying cars, which is fine as long as they are off the Chapman family payroll at the time and paying for their own insurance premiums, then I'm okay. The reality is that our brains are not wired, our human brains, our simple human brains, as awesome as they are just not wired to handle that level of complexity on a day-to-day basis. And this is our leadership challenge, to help our teams navigate this accelerating complexity within our HR agenda and in our worlds. So let's talk about focus. If you've ever been to a tennis match, you will notice that the chair umpire silences the audience. Right? You can hear a pin drop in those massive stadiums. And that is for the server to have a moment of silence to think about and focus on what they're about to do. Right? They bounce that ball 3 times. They're checking their grip. They're looking at their opponent and they're assessing up their strengths and weaknesses, taking inventory of their own strengths and weaknesses, and they toss that ball and they place it where they want. They do, I don't, but they do place it exactly where they want. Okay. And so 2020 was challenging for so many reasons. But one of the things that was amazing in my organization that came out was that I saw teams take that moment and focus. I saw headquarter teams completely repurpose in order to deliver service to our field organizations, right? They were working on, engineering teams were working on kind of these capacity projects. And they pivoted in order to go help the teams engineer social distancing mechanisms within our manufacturing facilities. And it was amazing to watch the focus of that happen. And so as we got out of kind of the end of 2020 and into 2021, we said, gosh, we really need to codify this. Something really awesome happened this year, and we really simplified the agenda, and we got to make sure that we codify that. And as we think about our objectives for 2021, we got to simplify, and we got to streamline, and we got to focus. And so maybe you will be surprised, maybe you will not be surprised, when I tell you that at the end of that exercise, I had 4.5 pages worth of objective and 8 font type. So we didn't quite hit the mark, maybe, on that. But here comes my role as a leader on what I do with that. And you kind of have 2 options at that point. You can send the whole thing out and say, we have to do all this, or you can really focus and be clear in your messaging for the teams on what you want them to focus on. And so that's what I did. At the beginning of the year, I stood in front of the teams and I said, hey, there's really 4 things that I want you focused on this year. And I know emergencies will come up, but there's 4 that I want you focused on. And the first one is around our racial equity and equality journey, right? That's the first one. The second one was around our organizational health and culture, not just the survey, the actual culture itself. The third one was around something that we called our Great Place to Work initiative, which is all about transforming the experience that our frontline employees have in our manufacturing facilities. And the third one was about talent development. And I took those and I said there was kind of a framework that I thought through on how to focus through on what I wanted them to, why I picked those. And a lot of them had to do around where is the center of control for how that work is going to get done? Who has the most impact over getting those different 4 priorities done? Where is the work most effectively and most efficiently done? And then finally, does any of that work or priorities need to be harmonized or centralized to take advantage of existing scale or create scale? So for example, on our organizational health, while I want the teams to increase engagement overall, what the teams need to do to make that happen in the Orlando manufacturing plant is probably going to look different from what they have to do in California. On my talent, so I want that to be local for them. On my talent agenda, I don't want 35 different upskilling programs. I want one upskilling program with one partner, but to be able to give to the teams to be able to embrace that and work with it. So that was really about simplifying that. The second piece on kind of codifying this came down to defining who the team is. And I think that a lot of leaders make a mistake on saying, in order to drive these priorities, I have to have the headcount devoted to that. I have to have a person that directly reports to me in order to be able to make that happen. And I would just challenge us to challenge our leaders on, we need to think more expansively about who our team is. So when I about those 4 priorities, the people whose names are next to those are not people that hardline report into me necessarily. Some of them are, but they are part of my greater extended team that are critical for delivering those different initiatives. And I have their names handwritten next to my 4.5 pages objectives, which I don't show to anybody, that's just for me, that I have next to it. And the final piece on helping the teams focus, or the third piece on really getting the teams to focus, is about what are the obstacles that are going to get in the way of them doing this work. And in 2020, that was COVID intakes, period, the end. And so we have to remove that obstacle, and so what we did was set up a centralized team to handle the intakes, handle the leaves, and then another centralized team to say, we need somebody to help us with streamlining and understanding all the different municipalities, the changes, the guidance that was coming out, the curveballs that were coming in. The final piece on focus, I think, is the hardest, and that's around saying no and being clear. And everybody in this room, you need to understand how large your shadows are. And I know you're like, hey, no, I'm not. I'm just me, and my shadow's not that large. But what I find time and time again is that people hear things that we say, and then they go do activity, right, as a result of that, right? You don't necessarily want them doing it. You pontificated about it, but here it goes. Now it's actions, right? So recently, I was in a meeting where somebody had come forward with a scorecard and they were presenting it out, and it became obvious to me that this had happened, that I had somehow said something, that they had gone and created this work. And so I said very clearly, with all great intentions, I said very clearly, hey, look, this is great, but I want to be clear, this isn't something that I'm going to leverage or use, and I don't want you spending a lot of time creating it because I suspect it took a lot of time to create this. I would much rather you not do this and spend time focusing on these other priorities. And they were surprised and a little bit shocked and then relieved that they weren't going to be spending the time trying to dig through our systems in order to try to find the right answers. So those are the biggest items on focus. So let's talk about watching the ball. So one match I was in, I was winning 4-1, and I ended up losing that set 6-4, and it was bad. And I sat on the bench, and I was kind of like a shaky mess. And my dad came over, and he's like, so how you doing? What happened? And I foot faulted the entire last game, and I can't get my serve to go in, and my toss is off, and my backhand is gone. And I just like melted in like this puddle of tears at his feet. And he was like, okay, being a girl dad, right? He was like, okay. He said, that may be true, but are you watching the ball? I was not watching the ball. I was very distracted, and I was distracted by two distinct things. I was distracted by, was I technically doing it right? Was the technique perfect? And I was also distracted by the fact that in my head, I'd already won. I'd already marked it up as a win in the column. And so I wasn't watching the ball. And we have a lot of distractions, don't we? We have a lot of distractions every day that can get in our way of moving those big rocks. And I'll tell you one, email. Email's a huge distraction, right? And I'm going to give you some tips for how to get out of that. Don't hold this against me. I'm only in my email about 4 times a day, max. I do it, I delete it, I delegate it, or I defer it. I do not have the little icon that tells me how many emails I've missed. I do not have the ding that comes up to remind me that there's a new email. And I do not open my Outlook to my email at the risk of getting sucked into a black hole. I open up to my calendar, which I have already made strategic choices on based on the priorities that I already talked about on how I want to move those marks. Either meetings that I will be in that drive those strategic priorities, or work time to be able to focus on those. This doesn't mean that I don't get emergencies. I get plenty of emergencies. But if I spend 80% of my time in those areas, I find that I'm moving the mark. The other piece on that for managing the distractions is really making sure that you're present in that. So if you're going to commit to those priorities, then commit to them, right? Like you have made, like people want the time from 1 to 2, 2 other people want time from 1 to 2, 1 to 2, 1 to 2. You make your choice on that, and then you be present with that team. And I personally had to relearn that in 2020. I would take meetings and then try to multitask during that, and that was not fair to the teams. And so really being present is huge. Now the final piece is about having fun. And if we do nothing else as leaders, it is about creating the culture of fun and creating the culture of winning for our teams. And 2020 and 2021 gave us all the reasons in the world where we could come into a meeting and be like, how are you? I'm fine. Things are good, right? But no, we have an obligation to make sure that we are being positive and bringing a winning culture to that team. I remember a match that I was in. I wasn't even losing. I was just mad. I was being very unkind to myself on the words that I was using to myself. And my coach came over and he's like, hey, instead of 3 negatives, why don't you try 3 positives and see where it gets you? And I think as leaders, we have an obligation to make sure that we are bringing that positive message and that positive leadership of winning to our teams. This room has a huge obligation to set the example, help the teams focus, help the teams clarify, help them watch the ball, and help them have fun in creating winning culture. And I'll tell you one last story. When I play tennis, I really love it when I play against people who like to slug the ball. There's nothing more than I love. It's so satisfying. Just slug that ball back and forth at the baseline. But not everybody plays that way, right? A lot of people play like this lob ball, right? And it comes like back over. And I used to lose a fair portion of those matches. And I remember my coach came over, like right up the fence, right? Pull right to the fence. Come here, right? And I came over. yes. And he says, I don't know whose game you're playing out there, but it is not yours. Right now, you are playing not to lose, and I need you to play to win. So today, I invite this group to help your teams focus, watch the ball, and have some fun. Thank you.